series with Dr. Megan Just-Mancini. And on the topic of Mental Health Week, I've asked her to do a session on empathy, as that is the theme for 2022 and the Mental Health Week. So I'm just going to start with our land acknowledgement. So it's an honor to use this time to welcome you virtually to this space that we steward on the lands of Treaty 6 and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. We recognize this as traditional and contemporary homes of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We see this moment as one of reflection, of gratitude, and of honest contemplation about how our everyday actions are contributing to this critical time of truth and reconciliation. As a Science Centre, we embrace curiosity and will continually search for better ways to uphold the values of peace, friendship, and understanding at the core of our treaties.
Awesome. Thanks, Brianne. Okay, so I'm Megan. Thanks for those of you who are joining right now, or if you choose to join later. Brianne, I should have said this before we started recording, but I know obviously you record these. Could you send me this session afterwards? Is that, like, no rush, but is that something that you're able to do? Okay, perfect. And the reason, and I'll tell you guys as I go through my informed consent that I have to do every time, Sojourn Psychology, where I work, is going to put this presentation on their YouTube channel. And so I often like to encourage sharing throughout this session because it's more fun when we can have a conversation. But that being said, I do want to be super transparent and just let all of you know that this will go up on YouTube. So if you choose to share, I just want you to know that there'll be other people outside of the TELUS world of science that may have access to, or will have access to, the conversation. So if you have any questions about that, or if there's maybe questions throughout that you don't feel comfortable asking and you want to ask me separately, that's totally cool. You can catch me at the end of the session, or I'll give my contact information at the end as well. So if you want to reach out to me individually to touch base, that's 150% okay with me. So with that, as I'm sure you guys all know by this point, but I'm a registered psychologist in Alberta. I work in a private practice in Sherwood Park called Sojourn Psychology. This is my office. The intent of this, as per all the others, is to provide information to support individual and structural and institutional health and well-being. The intent of this isn't to provide individualized or group therapy. However, again, if you have questions at the end, if you're seeking resources, if you have anything that you want to contribute, please, I try to be as open as I possibly can and receptive to any kind of feedback, good, bad, ugly. So please feel free to reach out if you need those pieces. Yeah, there we go. And confidentiality wise, of course, with this being shared on YouTube, there's that disclaimer. I will not personally share information with people outside of this session. If there is any private information shared, or for that matter, I mean, I'm not going to go around telling people your names or your demographic information, so that I can ensure confidentiality on my end. I, of course, can't ensure what you or your coworkers do, or anybody listening on YouTube, what you do, but what I would ask, in light of mutual respect and creating a safe place to share and to learn together, that we respect what people share and just keep it to ourselves. And there's no consequences for choosing to or not to come to this presentation. Awesome. If you want to be here, if you have to check out early, great. If you got to check in later, cool. This is just meant for your well-being and for the well-being of TELUS World of Science. So welcome and enjoy with me, hopefully. So today we are talking about neurodiversity and how to generate empathy in the context of neurodiversity. And so we're going to talk a little bit about neurodiversity. We're going to talk about empathy, what it is, how to do it. And then we're also going to look at when we are behaving in an empathetic or responding in an empathetic way, it's really important that we learn how to really listen, so that we really can put ourselves in that person's shoes and we can really walk along beside them in their lived experience, not our lived experience. So we're also going to talk about different ways to appropriately listen in order to be empathetic. So as Brianne said, it's what month is it? Mental Health May, and the celebration for 2022 and the focus particularly within the focus for May is on empathy, which, Brianne, I didn't know until you reached out to me. So thank you for sharing that with me. And the hashtag for that, for those of you who are involved in social media, is #GetReal. And when I was doing my research on this, I found this quote that I wanted to share with you because it really resonated with me. So we may be different, but that doesn't make us rivals. Let's stop polarizing and start empathizing. Be there for each other when times are hard and be ready to listen. You don't have to agree to understand, and you don't have to fix it to help. And that I really want to underline. I know I come from a fix-it background, and there's, this impetus or this pressure to, if I can fix it, that means that I'm going to solve your problem and I'm going to absolve you of all of your suffering or pain or challenge. And when we really, the focus when we think about empathy and when we talk about how to be empathetic and how to listen is not fixing it. It's this really beautiful power of being present just for the sake of being present, and to be able to listen and allow someone to feel genuinely heard. So we're going to start off with neurodiversity. I feel like in the ADHD presentation and the autism spectrum disorder presentation, we talk about neurodiversity. And whenever I come back to this, when I was making this presentation, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to add more information. So it's going to be a quick snippet, but there's some extra information that I haven't shared in other presentations. And so when we talk about neurodiversity, what we mean is the way in which our brains operate differently. And the truth is, specific to mental health, neurodiversity and understanding neurodiversity is looking at shifting from the medical model of there being something wrong or there being something in deficit for having experiencing anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism, whatever the diagnosis is. But what I'm going to say is that the truth of the matter is all of us have neurodiversity because all of our brains function differently, right? There is, based on the research, kind of what the research would purport as being kind of average. But in light of making a strengths-based approach and a shift in our orientation, it's understanding that all of our brains work differently. And when we think about the way that our brains operate, it comes down to, quite significantly, the way that the brain communicates. So this is where we'll start. So I'm going to do some Cole's notes on neuron functioning. So the primary way that our brain and our body communicate is through nerves, our nervous system. And so this is a blurry diagram of a nerve. And the way that our nervous system functions is by sending electrochemical signals throughout the brain and into the body that allow our different brain hemispheres, our musculature, our neurochemistry, all to have a conversation in a cohesive and consistent way. And so what happens is if we look at this, can you see my cursor? Brianne, can you give me a head nod if you can see it, or a head shake? No, you can't? Okay. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, no, I can now.
You can now. Okay, I'll go back to the full screen in a sec.
Yep.
So when we look at this cell body, what happens is we have, well, we're going to start here. So and then I'll explain because it's kind of a reciprocal cycle. So what happens is there's an electrochemical signal with a voltage, and the signal gets sent all the way down the axon, and it interacts with different functions at what we call the dendrites. So this is the end of the neuron. And when specific electrical signals are sent, this sends a message to the neuron about which or how much or in what pattern our chemical signals or our neurotransmitters. So those are things you've probably heard of, like serotonin, dopamine, GABA, noradrenaline, and adrenaline. Those chemicals get released into the synapse, and they travel across the synapse to interact with receptors. And based on the way, the intensity, and the concentration of the neurotransmitters in communicating with those receptors, that dictates how the neuron reacts. So if another electrochemical signal is therefore sent down another neuron, or whether signals are blocked. And this is a really complicated, really complex cycle. And I was thinking, okay, if we're thinking about TELUS World of Science, and let's say that there are staff, sorry, there's someone revving his engine in the parking lot right now, that staff upstairs are told that there's a fire drill going on, but staff are responsible to send information of that fire drill. So staff need to be able to run down the hallway, run down the stairwells, and they need to be able to get to the foyer to tell other staff and clients that are there that the fire drill is happening, so that they leave the building. Now, how this message is propagated is going to be dependent on how many staff initially know. Because if there's one person, if Brianne's responsible in telling all of TELUS World of Science, but especially with the 70,000 square feet edition or whatever it is that you're adding, that message is going to be really slow and it's going to take a really long time. That being said, too, if there's 150 of you running down the hall, there's a great message that's being spread. But if there's no clients or staff where you go, then no message is being sent either. So with that as well, if there's some staff that are left in the waiting room and they aren't told that the fire drill's over and they're sending false alarms, so they're sending signals to receptors that there's still this fire drill, still get outside, but things are okay, then aberrant or false information gets sent throughout TELUS World of Science, or in this analogy, throughout the brain. So there's a lot of different ways where neuron functioning can act differently, and through that, different messaging can be sent, and through that, the way that we perceive our environment or we respond to triggers is going to be significantly different. And so, does anyone have any questions? Oh no, does anyone have any questions about that? And again, I can't see if you're typing in the group chat because I have the full screen up. So just speak up if you have questions. Okay. So when we think about what neurodiversity is, it's complicated because it is about the way that our brain chemistry works. So when I talk about that, it's how much dopamine do we have available, or serotonin do we have available? Some people's brains have a whole heck of a lot of it. Some people have medium, and some have less than what we'd say is average. And so when we think about brain chemistry and we think about neurodiversity, for example, with schizophrenia, the predominant theory with schizophrenia is that certain regions of the brain have an excess of dopamine. And what that means is that there's more of the dopamine that's in the synapse reacting with the receptors. So with that false alarm, instead of the dopamine being taken back up, so the alarm of whatever the dopamine is offering stops, it continues. And so what proponents of the dopaminergic theory of schizophrenia say is that it might make an individual with schizophrenia have difficulty, or make it harder for their brain to narrow down or to cancel out or to dismiss aberrant information. So how that could manifest is for you or I sitting in, let's say, the kitchen, and there's this hum of the refrigerator that our brain naturally tunes out for us because it's not deemed salient. In the brain of someone who is diagnosed with schizophrenia, with that brain chemistry of having an excess of dopamine, that that humming of the fridge might be interpreted by our brains who want to make sense of the world. That's the brain's whole purpose, make sense and keep us alive, right? So in making sense of that, the brain might interpret that, and thereby I might experience that as an auditory hallucination. So as someone speaking to me when that person really isn't there. Now with that, just in light of dopamine, there are also, like, for example, Parkinson's disease, where Parkinson's individuals who develop or have Parkinson's disease have less dopamine concentrations. And what that means is that certain signals aren't sent to, in particular with Parkinson's, motor centers. And so with Parkinson's disease, there is, a tremor, and there can be difficulty with initiating walking, or in having cohesive speech. And that's associated with the brain acting differently because that brain chemistry is different. With that, neuronal activity and structure, right, depending on how many neurons you have, how sensitive your receptors are to certain neurotransmitters, that's going to make a big difference. When you look at lobe development and connectivity, so there's some research that demonstrates that individuals who experience anxiety, the connection between the prefrontal cortex, which is, if we can say, like our smart logical brain, so it's kind of rationalizing situations and thinking through situations, planning, time management, it's a little bit more weak of a connection to the amygdala, and our amygdala is our fight or flight center. So this is our center to keep us safe. And we know that with anxiety, the amygdala is very active because the brain is trying to it's working really hard to keep us super duper safe in situations where, objectively, you might not say there's reasons to have to be safe, right? But because there's less strength in the connectivity, it's harder for the prefrontal cortex to talk to the amygdala, to soothe the amygdala. And so with that, people experience anxiety on a different level because of that connectivity is a little bit different, or not because, I can't say it's causation, but it's a correlation. White and gray matter concentration. So white matter in the brain, we say it's myelinated, and those are the regions. Myelination allows for neural signals to be sent really, really quickly. And so sometimes when there are regions of the brain that are less myelinated, for example, like with Alzheimer's, you see a degeneration in the white activity. It takes a little bit longer for signals to be sent. But, in talking about neurodiversity, and I highlight that all of us are neurodiverse because all of our brains are different, this last point, brain activity period, as in stress, we all manage stress differently. Our amygdalas respond to our fight, flight, freeze response differently. And it's not that there's a quote unquote right or a wrong way to manage that. It's the way that our brains have evolved differently to manage distress. So when we think about that neurodiversity, I give examples in terms of mental health related diagnoses. However, all of our brains are different in these levels. Yeah, so that's what I talk about when I say neurodiversity. And when we think about neurodiversity in terms of being empathetic and being compassionate towards why people feel and behave in different ways, right? I've heard people say, you know, well, I was there too and I didn't respond that way. Or conversely, you know, so many other people go through a similar thing. So many other people have to give class presentations, for example. Why isn't everybody else as nervous as I am? Why are other people responding differently? And that is associated to a large degree with that neurodiversity, how our brains are responding and reacting to stimuli. And with that, our brains and our bodies are always talking to each other. That's why I'm talking and I can move my hands and I'm aware of my surroundings. And if I need to shift my body, I can. This is why we can behave in kind of what looks like a fluid and cohesive, as cohesive humans, although there's tons going on inside to make that happen. And a really cool study that I think really captures this brain-body connection was a study that was conducted, I don't remember by who, so sorry. But what they basically looked at, they collected the contents of people's tears, and based on the contents of their tears after they had been crying, the researchers could identify what emotion they were feeling in the moment. So when you think there's this neurophysiological reaction to an emotionally evocative event that leads to crying, whether it's angry crying, sad crying, embarrassed crying, excited crying, right? That sends a message more powerful enough throughout the body that the contents of the tears that are collected represent what was going on in our brains. And so with that, when you think a really common psychosomatic effect of neurodiversity and mental health are things like stomach aches, backaches, headaches, migraines are some of the most common. And it can be really, really hard to disentangle or differentiate between, especially for kiddos, I'll say. Well, and I'm biased because I work more so with kids, but you know, I have this tummy ache before school and I truly feel like I'm going to throw up. Why would I go to school, right? However, because of the brain-body connection, when you think about, let's say something's happening, you've got a test that you have to write and you're really nervous about it, or there's a conflict with friends, and this, I say school, but it can also be at work. There's a conflict at work, a tough meeting that you have to have that you really don't want to face. Cortisol is getting pumped out through your brain. This is our stress hormone, right? It's getting ready for this fight or flight. But the cortisol doesn't just stay in your brain. It gets pumped through our circulatory and our nervous systems so that it can interact and cause stomach aches, headaches, backaches, or for that matter, exacerbate them. And so when we think about being cognizant of neurodiversity and cognizant of the impact on our behavioral functioning, right? Like I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to avoid, my stomach ache goes away. It feels so good that, okay, we kind of in that way unintentionally empower the anxiety and the avoidance cycle, but it makes sense why that avoidant behavior comes around, right? Or if you're a person who grew up with like an abusive environment, your fight or flight is likely a fight response. So when the cortisol gets pumped, behaviorally that and emotionally that might manifest as anger, as rage, as fighting, as yelling, as screaming, in that this is the body and the mind trying to protect us. So when we think about neurodiversity, when we think about mental health, when we think about different ways that people emotionally and behaviorally respond, often it's not a choice, right? Often it's not somebody trying to be a pain in the ass. Often it's not somebody who's doing something to intentionally manipulate or intentionally cause. This is learning how to manage our own neurodiversities in the context of truly a world that has neurotypical expectations. These are the supposed to ways to respond, which doesn't fit everybody, which we know. And so as we get into empathy, this understanding that my experience is not your experience, and there's nothing wrong with either experience, and both are extremely valid, not only on a subjective level, but also on a neurochemical level. To understand that really helps to foster empathy within ourselves and within other people. And so this was my last presentation, but I will highlight it again. To empathize, to celebrate, to accept, we need to focus on a shift in language, right? So this the deficit model or the medical model of if you aren't quote unquote neurotypical, then there's something lacking or there's something wrong or there's a deficit. No, no, no. We are celebrating differences, and in creating empathy and compassion, it's coming back to that celebration, the understanding, and learning how to create an understanding so that you can understand and accept. And our language has a really important thing to do with that. So I say, let's shift deficit to diversity, cannots to cans, an atypical to a difference, and an impairment to a virtue. So getting into the empathy side of things, I say thank you to Brene Brown, because I love her very simplistic definition of empathy, which is feeling with people. And when we talk about empathy and we talk about feeling with people, what empathy is about is really putting yourself into somebody else's shoes and really authentically and truly connecting with what they are going through, particularly on an emotional level. And with this, in understanding neurodiversity and generating empathy, just because it's not my experience doesn't mean this can't be your experience. And so when we authentically put ourselves into someone else's shoes, it's what must they be going through? I might not get it. I might experience it completely different, even the same situation. But sitting with you in where you are at in the moment and what your subjective personal experience of that is. And those are beautiful words, but holy macaroni, can ever be hard to do that. So we'll start with why bother. And I don't know, obviously, any of your parents' backgrounds, to be honest, but I'm even just thinking socioculturally. I think about my parents, who are very loving, amazing people who did absolutely the best that they could. But for example, my dad immigrated from Italy with nothing. And the idea of focusing on feelings when you needed to focus on getting food on the table, making sure that rent was paid so that you had a roof over your head, getting to school. I know my dad, since the age of like 13, he would go to school full time, and then he would go and he would work like an 8-hour shift for construction so he could help support payment of the bill. So our basic safety necessities are being made. And so my parents' generation are harder than I am, and the generation before that is, we say harder, I'll say less emotionally attuned than they were, because when there's a scarcity of need, there isn't space for our minds or our bodies to think about like, hey, was I feeling anxious in that situation? Or, hey, were my feelings hurt when this person said this to me? And so this new age focus on being gentle and being compassionate and being empathetic, it's a real shift for people who grow up. And again, I can't speak for all the parents in this, the parents of the parents in this meeting, but there's a real shift from, it's this beautiful thing where we have our basic security needs being met, right? And so now we can start becoming attuned with our feelings and other people's feelings. But again, it can be a weird shift, and it can raise question marks, where I hear a lot from parents like, I wasn't raised like that and I turned out well. Well, you're right. And it's not to put anything down for the way that you were raised, but we can always evolve into better, stronger, more amazing people. So understanding why empathy is a part of that evolution. So as we can respond more compassionately to the needs of the people that we care about, right? It allows the other person to be authentically heard and understood and accepted. And what that fosters is a sense of unconditional positive love and regard. And by that, I mean, you're going to be there and you're going to have my back, and you're going to, accept me, care for me, love me, no matter what. That's when I'm at my best. But that's also when I'm really struggling. It's going to be safe for me to come to you to share that struggle with me, because I know that you're going to try to get it with me, and you're not going to try to fix it, or you're not going to dismiss it, or you're not going to reject it. You're going to be here for me. And not only on a physiological level does having someone be compassionate and empathetic actually physiologically regulate the nervous system, but what it also does is it also facilitates more sharing, so it can actually remediate challenges more quickly, rather than, I call it like compartmentalizing. So you put it in a box, and I'm not going to deal with it, and then it festers, and it explodes as something else. Creating this space for empathy and compassion, unconditional positive regard and love, mitigates that and can prevent that. And from an early age, when we think about kiddos, responding to kiddos' emotional needs with empathy and validation, which we'll talk about, actually supports the development of emotional regulation. So when I have big feelings, how can I regulate them in a healthy way? And then inhibitory control. So when I want to punch that kid in the face because they stole my toy, what can I do instead to behave in more of an adaptive manner? So it is research-based, even though sometimes for some, I think older generations, it can feel a little bit floofy. So fostering empathy, how do we do this? We really want to be curious. And when I say here, talk to people, like really talk to people, sometimes what we can get stuck in, particularly when we feel like there's a solution to the problem, and especially if it's like glaringly obvious to us, right? What we can do is we can listen to respond. So that is not listening. What that is I'm waiting to get my 2 cents in. And it comes with positive intentionality. It comes with a piece of like, I know what to do to take away the misery from you, or I know what to do to help. But what happens when we do that and when we don't just really listen is we miss the point and we miss the person's subjective experience of what they're going through, which of course with empathy, as I said, it's being with people in their emotions, and we can't be with people if we're up here deciding what we need to say. And so to talk to people and really talk to people, being curious in a really non-judgmental way. Like, oh my gosh, what is that like for you? Not, ugh, what is that like for you? Or like, why did you respond that way, right? That's pretty judgmental and invalidating. Because with that, it's okay not to know all the answers, right? It's okay not to have all the fix-its, and it's also okay not to understand what someone is going through, right? So by being curious and just sitting and listening to someone's subjective experience with an argument, with something stressful, with something exciting too. I mean, we talk about the tough emotions, but also with the positive ones, allows you to really connect and really understand. And with that, to get a really cohesive understanding, I know I've got a lot of clients who, no, it's fine. the everything is fine, which means everything is not fine kind of response, right? And so sometimes you can tell by the nonverbals if someone's saying everything's all good, but their nonverbals are saying otherwise, what it might be is coming back to that conversation. Maybe that person isn't really ready, or letting them know like, okay, awesome. And if you ever need somebody to talk to, I'm here. It's opening that space up for them to come to you as they're ready, rather than the push and push, which can actually cause people to retract. Now, in fostering empathy and trying to get it, there's kind of like different ways that you can put yourself in uncomfortable situations to try to get it. And one really awesome way is challenging yourself to do something different, or do something new, or do something unfamiliar. Because inherently in those types of situations, there is a discomfort, or there is maybe a different type of emotional experience that occurs as opposed to sticking with your comfort zone, right? And I guess I'll give an example for me. When I first moved to Boston, I was by myself. I didn't know anybody. I think I was there like a week before I started school. And so I was truly on my own. And I am not the person to like go for dinner by myself. I'm not the person to go to a movie by myself. Like that's my own discomfort that I have to work on. But I was put in a situation where I went out for dinner and I went to 2 plays by myself because the alternative was like sitting alone in this house by myself for 2 weeks, or for a week, sorry. And I'm so to this day really proud of myself for doing it. But with that too, when I think about working with, for example, some of my clients who experience high social anxiety, I might not experience that when I'm giving a presentation or when I walk into a mall, but the empathy that I can conjure from being in a situation where I'm at a play, I'm at a table with a bunch of people, I'm clearly by myself, I feel weird, even though objectively they might have thought I was weird, they might not have, I don't know, I didn't ask. But to be able to connect with that sense of discomfort and that sense of alienation, it's not the same. It's not 100% the same as what my clients might be going through or what a friend might be going through, but it allows me to empathize and connect to kind of try to get it. Other ways, really getting absorbed in a book or a podcast, taking yourself to that fantasy land, putting yourself in a character's shoes. It's that practice of empathy, taking yourself outside of yourself and putting yourself into someone else's situation. And then paying attention on purpose, right? Connecting how you might feel in that person's shoes, even though it might not be 100% the same. Or the truth is that, as a cisgender heterosexual female, as I am, I will never understand what it is like to identify as transgender. Never. Because I won't ever have the firsthand experience to put myself in someone else's shoes, right? But by authentically listening to someone's experience, good, bad, struggle, tough, right? Allows me to really try to put myself in their situation and what it would be like for me so that I can connect with them on that level. And so I want to share with you a little clip about Brene Brown, because there is a very strong differentiation between empathy and sympathy. And she says it better than I could ever say it. So I'm going to let her do the work for me. If you haven't heard of Brene Brown, she is a social worker and a researcher who's become quite famous. She's got an awesome podcast that is called Brene Brown. And I can't remember the whole thing, but if you Google Brene Brown, she's awesome. But she talks a lot about like guilt and shame and empathy and really kind of learning and understanding this emotional level. So anyways, she's awesome. I love her. And okay, so Brianna, I'm going to play it, and can you just nod your head if you can hear it?
And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of...
Can you hear that okay, Brianna?
We can hear it, but we can't see the video.
Oh, no. Oh, that's because, oh, God, I'm sorry, guys. If only I was good at technology. Okay. I'm going to unshare, and then I'm going to reshare. Okay. Can you see that now? Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay.
And to me, I always think...
Oh, no sound.
Oh man.
Jen, does this remind me of you? Remind me of your scene?
Okay.
I couldn't even help you, Megan. I don't even know.
No. Okay, let's just try this way. Any luck?
No.
No? Oh man. Okay.
When you share it, are you sharing with the video? Does it say at the top to share with video?
Share with sound, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
See? There you go. That's
Thanks,
how
guys.
tech savvy I am.
I know you think after 2 years of doing everything.
It's okay, Megan. I feel you.
Thank you. Thank you for your empathy. Presenting, give control. Because when I share, it just, hang on, okay, I'm going to stop again. Open share tray. Oh, include audio system. There we go. I just have to learn how to read. There we go. Okay. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, and now.
To me, I always think of empathy...
Can you hear it?
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, woohoo! Thank you for your patience. Okay. Sorry, guys. Here we go.
And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Does anyone have any comments about that? I love that little video. Does anyone have anything as I bring up the actual, my other screen again, that they wanted to share about that, or any thoughts?
I think it's great.
Thanks, Brianne. Me too.
Yeah,
it is a nice, yeah. Okay. And you know what? When I was rewatching this, when I was making this presentation, I recognize when she said at the at leasts, and I think, oh geez, I'm guilty of that too, right? At least. And then when I think about the purpose of that for myself, for me, and I can't speak for everybody, but for me, it's often padding my own discomfort to that someone that I care about is uncomfortable or is unhappy or is experiencing tough feelings, right? It's not, and not, I mean, my intent, of course, is like, let's look at the silver lining and let's look at the great stuff. But my intent with that is more for myself than it is for the person. And in thinking about what Brene Brown said, like, it's like, yeah, there it is. So even, you know, she talks about this conscious choice with being empathetic. I feel like for myself too, it's the breath before I speak to choose to connect on the emotional empathetic level rather than the silver lining fix it level. And that's for me. I don't know if any of you guys can relate to that, but all these little insights. So when we think about the key aspects of empathy, Teresa Wiseman, who I believe she's a registered nurse, who did a research article on kind of distilling down to the main pieces of what empathy entails. These 4 things: perspective taking, no judgment, recognizing the other person's emotion, and labeling and identifying it. So when we talk about perspective taking, we talk about, again, empathy, putting yourself into their shoes and connecting with their subjective, personal, emotional experience with the event. With this, I have on the side in big letters, this is your truth. In taking perspective, it's recognizing that while you might not share the same perspective or the same experience, what the person is sharing with you is their lived experience and their lived truth. And in being empathetic and compassionate, and before we'll talk about kind of the fix-it stuff, before resolution can occur or before changes in behavior or perception or action can occur, there needs to be the relational connection of they get it and they're seeing what I'm seeing and they're feeling what I'm feeling. And again, this doesn't have to align with your truth. It doesn't have to be the same. But by engaging in the at least or the minimizing or the diminishing, we'll talk about it, it shuts down the person's truth, it invalidates their experience, and thereby, not intentionally, right, but it can really put up a wall so that the person won't share any further. So that perspective taking, putting themselves in your shoes, this is their truth. Also creating a judgment-free zone, asking questions with curiosity and with authentic curiosity, right? I just want to understand, I just want to know, help me get that. Or as, you know, in that Brene video, in not getting it, I can't remember the exact words, but it being, I have no idea what that's like, but I'm so happy that you shared that with me and I'm here for you, right? And the judgment-free might be too, sometimes people aren't ready to share, right? And often it's very scary to share. It's scary to get on that emotional level and be vulnerable, particularly about the stuff that's tough. And so if somebody kind of, you feel like they're pushing back on you, that they're not ready to share, a part of creating a judgment-free zone is also saying like, okay, it's cool if you're not ready to share with me and I'm here for you when I'm ready. Like I'm going to walk along beside you. I'm not going to push you to be ready because I'm ready or I want you to be ready or I want you to fix it. So that empathetic tone, right? Or that empathetic vibe of just being understood and unconditionally accepted. It's also, I'm going to meet you where you're at and we're going to walk along beside together. And with that, recognizing the emotion, right? I often talk about with parents that I say all behavior is an expression of a need, okay? The behavior that we see on the outside, particularly undesirable behavior, right? Oppositionality, anger, aggressiveness, is typically comes from a really emotionally vulnerable place that is scary to share And it can be easier. It can be easier to be angry than it is to say, I'm so scared, or I'm so sad, or I'm struggling so much. And so when we talk about recognizing the emotion, it's thinking about the emotion underneath the behavior, right? It's underneath the action. And some people are very well professed at saying, like, you know what, I felt really insecure when that happened and I got mad. Kind of being that interception, or that being attuned with your own emotions and behavior. And some people have more difficulty with it, and that's okay, right? So it might be that, no, I was super pissed off, and recognizing the emotion. So yeah, I'd be pissed off. I get why you're pissed off, or I get you be pissed off in that situation. And depending on your relationship, it might be connecting even deeper to say, I bet you felt really hurt when so-and-so, you found out so-and-so was talking behind your back, and that came out as mad. But again, it's kind of learning how to navigate the relationship and how deep things get. And then with that, I kind of already did this, but it's labeling and identifying the emotion, right? So to say, I get when you had to have a serious talk with Brianne, that would have been scary for you, or you might have felt defensive. Not that Brianne ever makes anyone feel defensive or scared. Your face is just on my, the only face I can see. So to be able to connect, like, I'm hearing your experience, and I'm reflecting that experience back to you. And we're going to talk about different ways of showing that and listening, but we'll get there in a couple seconds. So unhelpful responses. So like Brene said, the silver lining are the at leasts, right? What that does is it minimizes the person's experience. And by minimizing the person's experience, I mean, it makes it seem like it's less important, less salient, less hurtful, less difficult than the person is experiencing. The fix-it response, well, if you had just done this, or if you just say this, or if you just do this, right? I find, even in my own personal life, to be honest, but, and maybe you guys can relate, but sometimes it's really, well, a couple things. Sometimes we know what the answer is, we know what the solution is, and I just need somebody to be on my team. I just need somebody to listen. I just need somebody to get it and be with me. And truly, if the fix-it responses can make people's backs get up, right? Because I want you to listen to me. I don't want you to tell me if it was a good joke or not. I want you to just hear that was embarrassing when people didn't laugh, even if it wasn't a good joke, and even if I know that, right? So avoiding the fix-it, and we'll kind of talk about how to get to more of the solution-based pieces through empathy later. Invalidation. So invalidation is denying, rejecting, or dismissing someone else's reality. I had a little client, and she had texted her dad that she felt like he was like he loved her older sister more than he loved her. And that was like an extremely emotionally vulnerable place for her to go to. And of course, I get for dad, like, it's a very scary, that's a scary thing to hear, right? Especially as a dad who loves both of his daughters. But his response was, no, I don't. And for my client, that was like the ultimate rejection. And I get, there was repair that came afterwards, but I get where dad's coming from. It's that intentionality of like, no, I love you, and like I'm doing my best, right? But what that little girl really just needed to hear was, I get it, and I'm sorry, and let's work on it, So that's that invalidation in terms of, no, your perspective isn't legitimate. It's not, your truth isn't true, right? And think about the messaging that can send a coworker, an employee, a child, a friend. Your truth isn't true. Talk about a fracture in relationship and trust, right? Now, when I talk about, so point number 4, being harsh or giving tough love, this is like this old school generation. There isn't space to talk about emotions. We're getting our basic needs met. And so there is, I hear a lot actually from clients and from people in my life that, we're too soft. And it can be hard to find this balance between being strong and empathetic and kind, right? As opposed to being too empathetic and then we become weak and we don't maintain boundaries. But to give tough love in terms of like, just suck it up, again, that's that invalidation or the denial of how authentic someone's experience is. And then 5th is comparing before listening. And so when we talk about empathy, and we talk about the process, obviously there's no robotic way to be empathetic. And truly, if we take a robotic route, then it doesn't sound authentic or genuine, and then it's not useful. So this might sound counterintuitive, but what's really important when creating an authentic connection and offering authentic empathy to someone that you're listening to is to really be intentional about listening to their lived experience before comparing. Because a comparison too early on can feel like invalidation, like dismissal of other people have it worse or other people go through it. So I dealt with it. Why didn't you deal with it? Right? Oh, yeah. I know what that's like. That happened to me in this situation. And sometimes that narrative can actually take away from the sharing person and become about the other person, right? So with the best intention, if I say like, oh my gosh, I totally know what it's like to be embarrassed. I had to give a class presentation when I was in grade 9 too, to a grade 9 student in 2022. Like, what the hell does Megan know, right? As an adult who they think is like a geriatric at this point, right? And so the importance of being with and listening before that comparison happens, kind of feeling things out, because sometimes we want that. We want to know that it's normal, but I'm really intentional about checking in. Hey, validating, being a part of that experience, and like, hey, do you want to know some of my experiences with this? And maybe the answer is no, and that's okay, right? But giving the space to kind of tread lightly and to know what different individuals prefer and what it is that they need in that moment, because it can vary in moment to moment as well.
Yeah. Can I just add on to that?
Yes, Brianne.
From my own personal experience.
Yeah.
I've had the invalidation happen over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then you start to question yourself and your sanity, and you're like, am I that crazy? No. Like, what's going on? Like, sorry, crazy is the wrong term, but like, am I out of it? Like, do I not know my own reality? Like, it's huge. Like, and that just brings up so many yucky things for me.
Yeah.
Like, I've had to now cut that relationship loose, like with a machete, like cut it, because it was just, I couldn't do it anymore.
It becomes toxic, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah,
awful. And so much better. But there's been a past, like in the last couple of months, like that relationship trying to come back, and all those invalidation things come up 100% again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is why I can't do this with you.
Yeah.
No. Bye.
And that being strong to set the boundary that's healthy for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but I know crazy isn't a kind word, but it's crazy making. I hear that from Brianne, not just from you, from clients all the time. It's like they can't trust their own reality.
Yeah.
To the level of like making a decision, because I'm never authentic, or for that matter, I'm struggling, but it's not bad enough for me to ask for help because I'm not really struggling,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I totally get all that invalidation stuff. It's wild and messy, and I try really hard not to make people feel like that, because I've felt it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the power of the invalidation. And then can I say too, the power of the validation, like how far it can go just to have someone listen. Hey.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
I just wanted to add that.
No, thank you. That's amazing. And that's a lived experience, right? So yeah, thank you. And so with that was a good conduit for listening. So tuning in before weighing in. And I like this quote too: being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. Just to be listened to, just to be validated, just to be heard, right? You see me as me and you accept me as me. So, different ways that we can go about this to really listen. So we're going to talk about active listening, validation, and then use of nonverbals. So when I talk about reflective listening, active listening, active listening is a process of being open and curious and using clarification. So this first point is the word that I was messing up with active listening, but reflective listening. And what reflective listening is paraphrasing or reflecting back in not so many words what the person has said to you. So, so when I told you it wasn't so bad, that really made you feel invalidated and that hurt you. That's what you're saying. And so it's paraphrasing back. And for some, and I'm going to say paraphrasing back using the person's words and lived experience, not your interpretation, right? It's not putting your subjective experience on what it should be like or how it should feel or how it should have been dealt with. It's what the person is telling you in the moment and their view of that. And in the reflective listening, again, it comes back to the language, the verbals that we use, right? So it's the non-judgment and the curiosity. What's it like for you when that happens? Oh my gosh, what is that experience like? Tell me more about that, right? I don't get it. Help me understand, right? Or a piece is kind of if you get it wrong, which it happens, right? Because I mean, we all have a brain that tunes in and tunes out certain information, right? So if we don't hit the nail on the head to say, hey, you know what, I think I got that wrong. Could you try explaining that to me again? So it's this open space of just come to me and share, and I'm going to do my 100% best to get it. And in reflecting that back to you, that one can validate to the person that like Brianne's really listening to me right now. She really gets it. But what it also allows for is clarification, to make sure that you got it right, because we are human beings and we are not perfect. And as much as we, really try to listen and really try to hear, all of us have really long, arduous days where our brains are tired and they have a harder time paying attention. And so sometimes we might miss points, and sometimes we might misinterpret things, and that is okay. So through that, the active listening, to be able to clarify, like, is this what you're trying to tell me? Or am I getting it right when you're saying this? Or I guess the sense that I'm kind of getting is this. Is that right? It really offers that place to check in. And on top of making sure that you're getting it right, what it also allows for in the moment is for in the moment repair. And so it can feel like, especially for someone who has experienced a lot of invalidation, or who has never experienced or finds it difficult to experience being understood, authentically understood and accepted for where they're at, getting it wrong can feel really threatening, right? It can be really, really scary to be like, well, fuck, now Megan's not even listening to me and she's the one who's supposed to. And so what I like to use the clarification for as well is to offer that repair. So I'm going to give you an example with a client years and years ago. And I don't remember the exact words, but I had said something along the lines of, it's really important for us to think about this so that you can make a smart decision. Something like that. Smart decision was in there. My intent, positive intentionality, my intent is let's be thorough, let's make sure we're making healthy choices. But that smart decision stood out to her. And as I was able to check in, because, I noticed her body language change, she gets a little bit more defensive towards me. And so I checked in, I said, like, did I get something wrong there? Or was something off? And she said, you just told me I'm stupid. And never, this is never in my wildest dreams would I call a client stupid at all, right? Of course, that wasn't my intention, but what that allowed for me in the time is to hear her and not project my judgment to say like, oh my God, no, I didn't mean that, get over it, right? But to be able to say, hey, okay, I get how that language would have come off that way. I'm really sorry, can I clarify what I meant? And she was open to that. So being able to clarify in that moment, we were able to repair a rupture, right? She was upset with me and we were able to repair. And that meant not only did we understand and appreciate each other more, but implicitly that forms a bond of trust of like, hey, if you don't get it right, you're really going to try to continue getting it right for me. And you're not going to push me away or reject me. And so that clarification is a really powerful tool. And so I kind of already spoke to this, but acknowledging when you get it wrong. That's my bad. I must have misunderstood or misheard. And sometimes I'll have clients who will say, no, Megan, I'm not mad. And okay, your tone of voice was telling me that you were mad, but I must be getting it wrong. Can you help me understand what you're really feeling, right? Because again, my interpretation, well, I might think I'm right, as sometimes, we all do, but that doesn't matter in that moment. What matters is the client's or the person's lived experience. And it's okay to say like, oh, shoot, I got it wrong. You're right. We're human. Let's come back together and let's repair this. Does anyone have any questions about that at all?
Do you have any, I guess we're going to get this recording, but there's anything other items that you can share around?
Like reflect back to listening? Yeah. Let me just make myself a little note. Okay. Just in turn, like websites and stuff like that. Have. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, if I don't write it on my sticky note, I won't ever do it. So, okay, cool. Yeah, for sure. I can email that to you, Brianne, and then you can send it out to anybody who wants it. Okay. Okay, so validation. Validation is how to really listen. And what validation does, it's, I mean, similar to empathy, it links, it basically tells, well, I'm looking in the corner. There's a definition there. I'm trying to make my own words and be fancy, but this definition is perfect. Recognizing and affirming that a person's feelings are valid and worthwhile. What you're feeling is real, and you have every single right in the world to feel that way. Okay. And so I know this is a little bit blurry, but when we look at the validating versus invalidating statements, the validation, I'm here to listen. The invalidation, just let it go. Invalidating, everybody feels that way. Validating, I can see that you're upset. I can't read the third one. I bet they didn't mean it when they said it, would be invalidating. If you want to talk, we can talk about it. What do you need? How can I help you? You seem fine. You don't seem like anything's bothering. You look fine. Very invalidating, particularly with mental health and the stigma that leads to people hiding kind of the core challenges and what's going on for them. So being really aware, like I like to use, oh, I lost what I was going to say. Oh yeah, walking along beside a person, right? Meeting that person with where they're at. And if you're picturing being on a walk, you don't have the leash and you're not pulling them ahead to say like, share with me, tell me, bring me more. It's like strangling your dog as you're going on the walk with them. You got to walk beside and you really, and create that space. And it might take a long time, right? Depending on a person's past and experience and their trust in you. And the truth is you might not be the person that they ever share with, but all we can do is our best to create that foundation and that ground. So when someone shares something amazing or really challenging, to be able to say, I'm going to walk along with you, and as you're ready to share, I'm going to share with you. Yeah, so that's the validation side of things. And then with the nonverbals, because of course our words are one thing, but behavior is the other thing, right? Behavior backs the words. And so being really cognizant of being intentional about listening, making eye contact, making sure that things that are distractible are put away, your phone's turned off, or it's put away somewhere, right? Or if you're doing like a phone call, sometimes it's nice to do like a video phone call instead, because there is something different in being able to see someone's face and connect with what they're going through non-verbally so that you can mirror that to them. Like we talked about last session in terms of our mirror neurons being activated, so that things like mimicking, and it's not even intentional, it's just what our brain does, but mimicking people's facial expressions. So if your friend is telling you that they're really sad, that your face, you're not smiling and you're kind of laughing, of course you're going to mimic that, that sadness, and you're going to be in that same type of the mood and the same kind of vibe with them. And your body language. Have your body facing the person that you're talking to, right? I say appropriately touch, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but I know the people that I can ask to give a hug to. I know the people that I can, if I put my hand on their shoulder, that's okay because of the relationship that's been built. Excuse me. And I also know people that are not okay with that. So of course, you might show love and affection by giving a hug, but if the receiving person is uncomfortable with that, again, we don't put our needs on someone else. We walk with them and know what they need in that moment. Nonverbals like nodding and using this is not a nonverbal, but like, okay, oh my gosh. Remaining engaged in your presence in the conversation, right? Not just kind of like, oh my God, yeah, that would have been hard, but what do you want to order from Skip the Dishes, right? That is very unintentionally or intentionally dismissive of what the person is explaining, and also doesn't give you the opportunity to actually listen so that you can actually empathize. Be aware of your facial expressions. There are some people who really wear their facial expressions blatantly, and there's nothing wrong with that, but just being cognizant of things like facial expressions of disgust or just not approving or eye rolling. Yeah, just, and again, appropriately. If somebody's telling you something that is disgusting that happened to them, then disgust is an appropriate emotion, right? But being cognizant that it's in line with where the person's at. As I said, reducing distractions and being with. And what I mean by being with is as it sounds. Sitting with a person, being next to them, being present, listening. It's okay not to have a fix-it. It's okay not to know what to do or to say. It's okay if the person's not ready to talk. Sometimes just sitting with somebody and listening can mean exponentially more and be instrumentally more helpful than any piece of advice or any words of sage wisdom, right? Just knowing that you've got someone who has your back and is going to listen and is going to at least try to get it means so much. So don't minimize that in yourselves as well. And then this is something I hear a lot from parents, but what if there is a solution? What if there is something glaring us in the face that it's so obvious? And I say, listen, 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 validate, then solve, okay? So my first point, listen first, ask later, right? So go through listening, reflective and active listening. I hear what you're saying. That must be really hard. God, that would have been really embarrassing. I don't really get it, but I'm here for you. Am I getting this right? All these bits and pieces that we've talked about. And I'm in my lived experience, the listening is really regulating, right? So you might see the person kind of self-regulate through the conversation. And then it might be a question of, hey, like, are you just wanting to vent to me right now, or do you want some solutions? Allowing that person to decide, because while the solution or the fix it might be easy for you, that might not be what the person needs, right? And so to blatantly check in, no, you're good? Okay, cool. Let me know if you do, but I'm here. I'm here for you, even if you don't want tools or strategies. And then listen first and solve later. So if the person is saying like, hey, yeah, I kind of want some solutions, just being cognizant about being compassionate and gentle in the way that you deliver them, right? So not to say like, well, if you weren't being so selfish, then the person probably wouldn't have gotten mad. Or couldn't you have just seen that it would have been easier just to walk away than it was to freak out, right? It's the curiosity and it's the non-judgment, and it's offering tools in ways of like, hey, could it have been helpful, do you think, to do this? Or like, okay, we've talked about, or like there's these strategies or these accommodations that we have. What of them are helpful and what's not, and kind of how can we navigate together? It's approaching as a team in a really supportive manner. And the key with that is just to maintain empathy and validation, right? So I totally get why you'd be pissed off about X. I agree that walking away and asking for a chat would have been a better choice in the future than sending an angry email. What can we do to help make that happen in the future, right? How can we collaborate? Because there's the understanding and then there's the support. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to support you to help you get bigger, better, stronger. And then there's redirecting in the moment, right? So someone comes to you really overwhelmed and they're upset, let's say, and there might be a piece where like, okay, maybe there is space for this person to, maybe there's time to sit down and to really talk about this. And maybe in light of where we're at right now, there isn't that time, but offering the space in another time. So I have here, like, I can tell you're really overwhelmed. That's empathy and validation. It's really busy out there and everybody's being super impatient. So I get it. How about take a 5-minute breather? And how about we chat? What was going on for you? I've got like 15 minutes at the end of the day, maybe if we can sit down together, you know, or how about at lunch, we have lunch together and we talk about it. It doesn't, I mean, ideally when we need to be heard, we need to be heard, but you guys also work at a very busy organization. And so it's being intentional about like, hey, I'm here and I see you, and let's create the space to have this conversation when it's realistic to have that conversation, right? And okay, so with this is the end of the presentation. Social media, you know, has its strengths and its areas of not strength, of challenge. But these are a few accounts that actually some of my clients have shared with me that are really in celebration and about creating awareness about neurodiversity. And so I'm not, as you could probably tell by me starting the video, tech savvy or into social media. However, if you are, take this and check it out. And so with that, any questions that you had? And this is just a sweet little Winnie the Pooh. I know it's hard to read, but Piglet noticed that even though he had a very small heart, it could hold a rather large amount of gratitude. I thought that was really sweet. So with all the gratitude I have for you guys sitting through this presentation again, thank you. And does anyone have